Welcome to the Money and Flow podcast, where avocado toast and stocks meet. Did you know that women and women of color don't talk that much about money? And did you also know that the health and wellness community is a $600 billion business? And did you also know that women aren't in the forefront when it comes to decision making with our health and wealth? We're here to change that. This is the first podcast that focuses on wellness and money. This podcast is targeted for women and women of color, specifically in their 20s and 30s. And without further ado, your host, Eugenie George. Hey, welcome to the Money and Flow podcast. Super excited to be back. I was gone for a couple of weeks simply because I finished a book, and that book is called Money and Flow, Not Your Average White Guy's Money Book. So it's going to talk about money, practicality, but at the end of the day, you got to have some of that woo-woo, which is kind of like the flow part of it. Anyways, enough about that. I'll make sure 2019 I explain the whole thing. There's going to be a whole podcast series. So yeah, very excited about that. So let's just dive into this conversation. So Chloe Johnston is a very well-heeled traveler. She's been traveling for a really young age. And Chloe was first introduced to Paris, and that's when she started her business. So for the past couple of years, she has got her MBA in fashion entrepreneurship, and then started these awesome fashion tourism experiences for folks. So I don't want to talk too long because I really, really enjoyed how sharp she is for her age, how sharp she is for how business savvy she is. And I also learned a lot about fashion, which if many of you have seen me, I pretty much wear a sweater and jeans. But I do know how to dress because my mom is from the fashion industry. So I'm not completely like, well, how do I dress? So that is kind of like the fun part. So yeah, without further ado, Chloe Johnston. Oh, and before that, I just want to let y'all know that I'm going to sprinkle out a couple of extra episodes, particularly because I'm going to take a break for the month of December because I just finished writing this book and it has taken a huge piece out of me, so I do need to relax. But yeah, if any of you guys, there's lots of downloads. There's been about 500 downloads, so that's exciting. If any of you guys know of a woman of color that specializes in mental health or particularly wellness, and you think that they would be great for the podcast, please let me know. The email is moneyandflowpodcast@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's dive into Chloe Johnston's interview. Hi, welcome to the Money and Flow podcast, Chloe. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Or the same thing that I like to ask every single time is, what is your money story? Because I think that you have a powerful story, and I would love for the audience to learn about it.
Yeah, of course. So I'm actually going to kind of relate mine as well as my parents, because obviously my parents were hugely influential in this. So both of them, actually, my dad's from Jamaica. He grew up very poor, and my mom is Ukrainian, and she grew up in Pittsburgh. And it's funny because she always tells people that she didn't really know that she didn't have anything. So her parents were very much, they showed her love, they showed her what they could, but she never really knew until she went to boarding school that, oh shoot, there's a lot of people out here that have a lot of things that I don't. So I was kind of raised with that similar mentality that you work your butt off to basically get where you are, and then be sure that you provide for a family. So that's kind of been instilled in me my entire life. My mom has a company, my dad now has a company, so I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur as well. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. And when I started the company, I actually was very heavily focused in fashion, which is funny because going back to high school, I went to an all girls private school. And a lot of the girls in my class, you know, their parents had a lot of money or they came from money, whatever this story may be. And I was always the one that would go to like a Kohl's or a Ross, and I would find all these crazy items that I just thought were great, and I'd wear them however I chose to wear them. And people were always commenting on the things that I chose. And then, I mean, looking back on it now, I realize it, but at the time I didn't. It was just so interesting to me that, you know, it's most important to be true to yourself and find items that kind of fit your personality as opposed to looking at a brand or a name tag or a price tag. So
Right.
that's kind of transitioned me along the way and kind of been really important in what I started and the focus of how we started the company.
Yeah, I love that just because that reminds me of I think it was a long time ago, but Oprah used to always have Tyra Banks on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And she would always teach folks how to find stuff at a mall or like not spending that much money and how you can be fashion forward and also use what you have. So I think that's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Um, so since you've already kind of nudged about businesses, how did you start your business?
So it actually goes back. I'll try not to do the super long version, but it goes back to when I was about 12. And my mom put together a trip to Paris. I think there was three families. And we all fell in love with the city for very different reasons. So for me, this was my first time leaving the country. It was my first time being surrounded by people that didn't speak English. And it was just very eye-opening in terms of the different cultures, the different food, different things you did there, different things you were exposed to. And, you know, for me, it was just, oh, I'm eating chocolate for breakfast. This is the best thing ever. But later I realized that, you know, travel is so important for so many different reasons. And I moved to New York after college and decided to I worked in PR for a while and then decided to get my MBA in fashion entrepreneurship, which most people kind of looked at me like, what in God's name are you going to do with that?
Right.
And most of the students in my program actually were going into buying, planning, merchandising. I was really the only person that was focusing on entrepreneurship, which for me was great because I could bounce all of my ideas off of everyone and the attention was on me because nobody else was starting business.
Right. I mean,
So,
that reminds me of sorry to cut you off, but that reminds me of so there's this crazy study that said that only 3% of people that have gotten their MBAs have started a business. So it's like a very small percentage, but then also folks that have started a business while they were doing their MBA, a lot of people, they're like the Warby Parkers, where they're actually trying to understand and grow their business while they're in school. So that's pretty awesome. So
yeah.
yeah.
It's great because you have it's almost like you have a support group, but then you also have potential customers and naysayers that you can bounce things off of.
Hmm.
So you're always going to have somebody that's going to say, I don't like the idea. But you more so have to focus on what's the constructive criticism that you're getting. So it's one thing to just say, well, I don't see the point of that. It's another to say, you know, maybe this would be more beneficial because of this. So it was great to kind of figure out, well, where do I start with this and where do I want to go with it? So I noticed that, again, kind of tying back to what I was talking about in high school, once we started traveling to Paris more often, my mom eventually purchased an apartment there that she redid. We got to know her neighborhood really well when she wasn't renting it out. And fashion has always been something that I was interested in, but I didn't really think I could do anything with it. You know, I'm not a designer. I don't draw. I don't sew. So I came back. Every time I'd come back, I'd have something new. And people were always asking me, you know, where did you get that handbag or where that scarf? Or most likely it's clothes because that's my love. Um, but I started noticing that, you know, people that had been to Paris didn't know where to go, didn't understand how to shop. They didn't understand the fashion world over there. So I thought, why not create a business that's focusing on fashion in Paris and showing people the ins and outs of, how the industry works. So that's kind of where I started the company, just simply focusing on fashion shopping trips in Paris. And then we grew it a lot from there and basically took the idea that, okay, we're showing you things that you wouldn't have access to. We're showing you behind the scenes, we're opening doors that you wouldn't even know existed, and kind of added in more experiences. So food, wine, art, interior design, with the same concept of, we're showing you things and presenting you. It's almost like I'm opening my Rolodex of relationships and saying, I know this amazing chef, why not do a private chef dinner? Or I know this amazing designer, how about we have them design your wedding dress? So took that model and basically just decided to start launching in different cities. So that's kind of how we got from just shopping in Paris to really experiential travel.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Do you remember what your process looked like? Were you actually just staying at your family's apartment and like bouncing around, or were you emailing people back and forth, or did you stay in Paris? I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah, so it's actually a combination of all of the above. So when my mom first purchased her apartment, my dad thought she was insane. And it's funny because one of her friends called her and said, the market right now is amazing. It's when they still had the franc, so the conversion rates were ridiculous.
Right.
And he found this apartment. It's in an amazing location. It's 10 minutes from the Eiffel Tower. And she thought, you know what, why not? So she ended up buying the apartment. She completely redid the inside, and then decided to rent it, which was brilliant because, it paid for the mortgage and more. But when it wasn't rented was when we would be able to stay there. And I would go probably for maybe like a week max at a time, and just kind of get lost. So my biggest thing was, okay, first and foremost, I need to find these, amazing places that tourists don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of just went from there. So I met this amazing woman who creates handbags, who was actually just here with us. She just left today. And her story is incredible, but that's a story for another time. But I met her first, and it kind of just spiraled from there. So it's funny, the French are a very particular type of person, and they're very much focused on, whether or not they trust you and a feeling they get from you. So just because you meet somebody for the first time doesn't mean they're going to instantly open the doors to you. So you kind of have to build that rapport with them. But then once you get in, it's almost like, whatever you want, whenever you need it, here you go.
Right. Like
So,
that reminds me of that's how I actually feel about, I've been to Paris too, and yes, I 100% concur with that, but it reminds me of the East Coast too. Like, I'm from California and everyone's like, hey, like, let's hang out, let's be friends. But the truth of the matter is the East Coast kind of reminds me of Europe sometimes, because it's like you do have to build your trust. So
yes,
yeah, that's awesome.
coming from an East Coaster, Philadelphia in particular.
Oh yeah, you have to, they have to know you, or
Exactly.
they don't trust you. It takes a while to build those bridges. Yeah.
And it's funny because, the friend, obviously you can't categorize an entire country, but
Right.
people that I've met have been absolutely incredible. And they're the ones who've introduced me to all of these amazing people that I met.
Oh,
So
okay. Cool.
the first step was, I need to step outside my comfort zone and just start meeting people in a foreign country where I don't speak the language. And then from there it was, okay, let me build these relationships, and then they're going to introduce me to their friends, and then they're going to introduce me to their friends. And then my network kind of just grew from there. And then in the process, I'm here in Philadelphia. I don't live in Paris. I don't live in New York anymore. I don't live in London. I don't live in, all the places that I have experiences. So I had to build relationships with people that could be my eyes and ears in those destinations. So that was kind of step 2 of the process. Who do I trust that can help with clients, but can also help with the expansion of the business, that can also help with, you name it. So that's kind of, the short version of how the process looked. And then, as you go to new cities, you kind of have to just start that process again.
Right. And are most of the it appears that there's like a mixed bag. Like some are English speaking places and some are not. Um, how is that in terms of like stepping into another culture? Can you talk a little bit about those experiences? Because clearly that's in your business process if you're building trust and community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's funny. Luckily, and I feel like this is something that is lost on a lot of Americans, but most people in other countries speak at least 2 or 3 languages. Um, and luckily for us, one of those language tends to be English, unless you're in a lot of places in Asia, actually. So for me, the language barrier wasn't as big as an issue as you might think it would be. It's more so culture. And I tell people this all the time. You can't just go somewhere and expect to act the same way that you act at home. And if you put yourself in their position, think about if you're in a restaurant and if you're here in the States and somebody comes in from another country and they're yelling in their language to their friends and being loud and obnoxious. You would have the same reaction as if you went to Paris, you walk into a cafe and you're screaming in English. So I try to tell people you have to take yourself out of the situation and kind of look at it from their perspective and understand first and foremost what's respectful here. So before I go anywhere, we can use Paris as an example. I try to figure out like what common practices are. So for example, in Paris, you walk into a shop, you say bonjour. You never don't address them because it's considered very rude. You always say thank you. So there's just little things that you just have to learn about before you go places. And then once you get there, you just ask questions. And, you can't be afraid that somebody's going to, laugh at you or, say whatever to you. They'd appreciate that more. So again, you kind of do role reversal. If somebody came up to me from, China, for example, and asked me a question about, oh, I don't know if I'm supposed to tip, I would love to explain to them, oh, this is how this works. This is some advice for the next place. So, you kind of just have to look at it from that perspective. You don't want to be naive about it, So it definitely was a really interesting thing to come across and learn about. But at the same time, it opens your eyes to so many different people and so many different ways of life. It really is fascinating.
Yeah, that's awesome. I also think that is really true with traveling, is breaking down, not having the same expectation as if you're home. I think, and I also think a lot of people, when they travel, they forget that because they're so used to their intentions.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's a good piece to think about. Also, I think that I would say, this sounds crazy, but I think that you starting in Paris was probably the best place to start, because those are a lot of the Parisian folks are, you do have to put in a lot of work. And I feel like once you break through that mold, or even just talking to someone that is French or grew up in France, and they trust you, the walls have kind of dismantled. I feel like when I was in London, it was like, hey, everybody, it was a lot more opening. But like Paris, you got to put in some work. So that's awesome.
It's so true. We have a funny joke with Aaron, who works with me in Paris. When something happens, we both just say, well, that's the French. It's a very particular mindset. And,
Yeah.
You have to know how to deal with it. You have to know how to talk to them. You have to know how to approach things. You don't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, let's talk business. It doesn't work like that.
Right. Yeah.
You have to talk to them. You have to gain their trust. You have to figure out, what are you doing? What's beneficial? And then you go in from the business side. So it's true. When I took the business from Paris to New York, and New York was easy because I lived there for a while. But then I took it to London and Italy. And with Italy, I was like, oh, wow, this is easy. I can call anyone. And they're like, yes, of course, come,
Yeah.
But on the flip side, it takes them 3 times the amount of time to get back to you and do things
Mm,
than it would, for example, in New York or London. So again, you just have to embrace whoever you're dealing with and how they work in that particular city, country, whatever it happens to be, and just know if I want something done in Italy, I'm going to have to start a lot earlier.
that is true. That's very accurate.
Mm.
um, okay, so you're doing all these things, you're traveling, you're maintaining, you're staying on the East Coast, but then you have to go back and forth. How do you maintain your lifestyle with your business? Like, do you have any systems or processes or uh, habits or hacks?
Yes. So for me, I've learned you have to take time for yourself, which is a very difficult thing for me to do just because I don't like being alone. So I played soccer my whole life. So for me, working out is incredibly important, not just from the standpoint of staying in shape, losing weight, whatever. It's a huge stress reliever for me. So I've learned that if I don't maintain that type of lifestyle, then I will go insane. So when I'm traveling, it's not always, for example, just recently have men and women in Paris been really focused on working out. That was previously, that wasn't a thing. Me talking about any type of workout class, they look at me like I was crazy. So it's not that easy to just go somewhere and say, oh, I'm going to go, do flywheel, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to go do that. So first and foremost, I make sure to walk everywhere when I'm traveling, because you don't realize how healthy walking is for you, but it keeps you active, it keeps you out, it keeps you on your feet. Um, if I'm staying at a hotel, which I actually prefer staying at apartments, if I am staying at a hotel, then I'll try to get a workout in. If not, I don't beat myself up over it. But that would be the first thing. The second thing is I'm gluten free, so I'm allergic to gluten, and I'm also lactose intolerant. So I have to be really careful when I'm traveling to make sure that there's things that I can eat. Um, my body is just a little crazy, as I'm sure most women's bodies are, but I need to eat every 3 hours. I need to make sure that I'm staying hydrated. So I make sure to have snacks with me as well. You don't want to ever get sick when you're traveling. I actually carry my water bottle on the plane, and then I take it with me everywhere when I'm traveling. So, that way when I get home, I'm still in the mindset of eating how I would eat. I'm still, even if I didn't work out in the normal sense, I walked everywhere. So, you're talking 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 steps a day. And I drank enough water the entire time that I don't feel like sluggish or overly exhausted. So I
Right.
think it's just a matter of, you have to find what's most important for you. So that's going to look different for every single person. My husband's very much into meditation. So for him, that's a huge part of his day. He's getting me into that as well. But you kind of just have to pick, what's important to me to make sure that I stay, the best version of myself, whether that's reading, whether it's doing yoga, whether it's meditating, whether it's just taking a walk, whether it's just, making sure you have enough water, whatever it is, you find that thing and just make sure that you keep up with it no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think as someone who else is also lactose intolerant, the struggle's real. Like, you do have to
Yes.
pre-plan, pre-do everything. So, and have you ever noticed too, because I feel this way, where if I plan a lot or over plan, I am more able to relax. Like, sometimes I can't go with the flow with things. I have to know that there's sort of some structure to it for me to actually relax. um, I know that's not how some folks are, but yeah, that's how I feel sometimes.
Yeah, and you have to figure out, what's best for you. So I am a planner. Obviously part of why I started this company, and to all of my friends, I plan everything no matter what we're doing. But at the same time, and this is kind of what has been great for my clients, is you have to find the balance. So
Right.
yes, it's great to plan, but you also want to try to just plan one activity per day.
Yep.
You're not to the point of I am going to lose my mind because I haven't stopped moving since 7 a.m.
Yes.
So it's again, it's all about balance, and I can't tell somebody how they should balance, their day. It's more so sitting down and really thinking about, okay, what's most important to me, and then
Yes.
going from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's accurate. Speaking of which, like we talked about the life or your maintaining your lifestyle even with your business. Um, can you talk to us about like your best travel hacks, like different tips and tricks that you've learned over time?
Yeah. So one of my favorite ones is actually for plane tickets. So, and I think most people at this point know this, but the best time to purchase plane tickets is on Tuesday evening. So a lot of airlines, for some reason, put deals out for their flights on Monday night. So then by Tuesday, everyone's kind of competing to get the lowest rate out there. So that's the best time to fly. And then if you are flying somewhere, it's best to try to fly on off days. So obviously Friday and Sunday are going to be the most expensive. So
Right.
try to fly on like a Wednesday night and come back on like a Tuesday. Um,
Right.
if you can't do that, no big deal. That's why you try to buy your tickets on Tuesday night. There's actually an app that I love called Hopper. Um, and basically what it does is you just put in the dates that you're flying, and then it tells you the best time to book your ticket. So I think I have flights in March. So basically it said to me, your ticket price is going to vary from now until I think it was December. And then December, it's going to go up in value. So you kind of just, you find these like little apps and things that help you there. And then one of the other things that people always, always, always ask me about is jet lag. Um, and there's, everyone has their own little remedy for how to deal with it. Mine's kind of simple. First and foremost, hydration is so key. So I always tell people you need to hydrate. It's not just the day of. So, for example, if I'm leaving on a Friday, I really need to start my hydration on Tuesday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, make sure you're completely hydrated. Friday, you almost want to double what you think you would take, especially if you're going on an international flight. And then as soon as you land, you want to make sure you're hydrating. Water is just so important for, everything within your body, but it really does help kind of keep you alert and awake. And then the second thing is making sure that you sleep on the plane. And then once you get to your destination, making sure that you get right on that time zone. So for example, if you're flying to Paris, normally you take an overnight flight, you get there the next morning around 7 a.m. I always tell people try to stay awake as long as possible. So by the time that you go to bed that night, you're exhausted, A, and B, you're going to sleep when everyone else is going to sleep. So it'll be a lot easier to wake up at a normal time as opposed to falling asleep in the middle of the day and then not being able to go to sleep. Go to sleep. The longer you take to get on the schedule of wherever you're going, you're just never going to get acclimated. So the sooner you can kind of jump into that time zone, honestly, the better.
Yeah, I never thought about actually staying on someone's schedule. Like I believe in the sleep part, but yeah, that's actually a brand new tip for me. So thank you. So we talked about travel hacks. Could you tell us who is your travel influencer, or like what influences you when you're traveling?
So I kind of touched on this in the beginning, but my biggest influence, honestly, was the first time I went to Paris. For me, that was just such an eye opener and such a changing moment. Um, and honestly, my travel influence kind of comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. So I kind of choose my destinations just based on like what's calling to me at that time. And that sounds crazy, but there's no real rhyme or reason as to why I choose somewhere to go. From the business side of it, we expand the business based on where clients are asking for the most. So for example, we expanded to Italy because we had a ton of clients that wanted to go to Italy. So from that aspect of it, it's fueled by clients. From just a general me traveling to travel, it's kind of just what calls my name. And then when I get there, I really kind of pull my influence from everything around me. I love food, despite not being able to eat half of it. Uh, Obviously, I love fashion. It's a huge part of who I am. I mentioned that I played sports my whole life. So, the active aspect of cities is really interesting. And I just love being outside. I love sunsets. So I kind of just like to take it all in, and each place has kind of left a different piece of it with me.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's so funny how your first experiences of traveling, or even when you're a kid, it's so interesting how those experiences have a lasting impact on us.
Yeah, it's so
Y-
true.
Yeah. Um, so speaking of that, because I know that I was actually talking to a friend of mine who never travels, and I remember asking him like why, and he was like, "Well, I just don't see anything that's um, different. Like I don't know what's different. Clearly, because this person hasn't traveled as much, that they aren't aware of different possibilities and also adventures and exploring." So, can you kind of break down some misconceptions of travel for people?
Of course. And I can start with your friend's misconceptions. I think what a lot of people don't understand is the value of travel, and honestly what you get out of it. So, for example, my brother has been lucky enough to have started traveling when I think he was 4. And he's actually been more places than all of us. And his mindset, his outlook, his openness, his understanding of people in general is just so broad. And he's 25, and you can see that difference with a lot of his friends. Um, he's a lot more mature in some regards because of that travel. You're exposed to things that you would never be exposed to at home, no matter who you are, because there's no culture like that in Paris unless you're in Paris. So unless you go there and you immerse yourself in it, you're not going to be exposed to it. And I think the other thing that's different is you need to travel like a local. As soon as you go somewhere and you stick to the tourist destinations, and I don't mean, don't go to Paris and not go to the Eiffel Tower. What I mean is, you go to Paris and of course you want to see the Eiffel Tower, of course you want to go to the Louvre, but you have to step outside of that. When you go to those places, it's mostly going to be American. So how are you experiencing Paris if you're sticking with that? Um, so two examples I like to give: we were in China last year, and then we were in Bali. And, I didn't really know what to expect going to China. We were very lucky. One of my first interns ever, actually, who went to Drexel, um, we did a lot for him when he was here. We kind of took him under our wing, and his parents were very grateful. So they invited us to visit them in China. Um, so we were lucky in that we had him with us to kind of show us, the really the ins and outs and really cool places over there. And one thing that was really eye-opening is, for us, family is very important. I'm very close with my family. We talk all the time. But going there and just witnessing, for example, how they eat dinner or how they eat lunch, it's a huge ordeal. You don't just go meet someone at Starbucks for 10 minutes and then go about your way. You sit at a huge table. You have a center circle thing that spins so that everybody's sharing food, everybody's talking, everybody's telling stories. It's not a 10-minute thing. You're there for an hour and a half. So it was just really, and similar to kind of how the Italians do as well, but it was just very interesting to see how important family is and how they tie food into that, because it was just a different way of looking at things. And again, I'm sure, you've heard about respecting your elders in China is very important. And it really, really is. And it also kind of reminds you, it kind of reminded us of how much our parents have done for us. And maybe we don't always show that. And then the second thing was when we went to Bali, the food was incredible. And they honestly, everything we ate essentially came from the backyard of wherever we were. So it was a constant reminder of the actual farm to table. It was literally farm to table, as in you could look out wherever you were and see the vegetables being grown, the fruit, whatever herbs they were using. If you wanted to go pick them yourselves, you could. So it kind of just gave you that new perspective on, relation with the earth and, healthy eating. So I thought that was really interesting too. And then one last misconception, which I feel like is pretty much everybody's first thought, is that travel has to be incredibly expensive. And of course, you can go somewhere and spend a lot of money, but you also can go somewhere and not break the bank. And I think that what people forget is to travel doesn't necessarily mean you have to fly. For us, for example, the Finger Lakes is a 5-hour drive. So you kind of have to weigh where are you going and how do you want to get there? If it's by driving, great, you're going to save money. If you want to fly, then look for inexpensive flights. Plan your trip in advance. Make sure you're flying on off days. Keep a weekend in there so that you don't have to take as much time off from work. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is looking at apartment rentals. Typically speaking, depending on how many people are traveling, staying at an apartment is going to be a lot less expensive than a hotel. Plus, in an apartment, you can go buy food for the week or the weekend or whatever it happens to be. You can make yourself breakfast and you can choose maybe 2 nights or 3 nights or however long you're there to make dinner for yourself. And then that way you kind of are saving money on eating every single meal out. And lastly, just giving yourself a budget of, a realistic budget of this is what I want to spend while I'm gone, and really sticking to that budget. So whatever that number is, however small or however big it happens to be, then just budget out your time. And if your budget doesn't allow you to go for a week, then don't go for a week, go for a weekend. Right. If your budget doesn't allow you to go for a long period of time, then you have to change where you're going. So I think people automatically think, oh, I have to spend 10 grand to go travel. Well, no, you don't. If that was the case, then there wouldn't be high schoolers traveling. You just have to be realistic about it.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes, I love, love, love this.
And where can we find you on the social media?
Of course. Okay, so we're on everything pretty much. Instagram, it's just Chloe Johnston Experiences. Facebook, I believe it's also just Chloe Johnston Experiences, but I'm going to double check and make sure that, because I know we've changed it a couple times. Yes, so Facebook's also Chloe Johnston Experiences, and then I think Twitter is by Chloe Johnston. And then where else are we? And then you can just go to the website, chloejohnston.com.
Right. And I'll make sure I'll post that on the show notes as well. But yeah, thanks so much. And I love your blog. So you have like a very specific blog, like this is what you should get when you travel here. This is what you should do here. That's very helpful as well. So yeah, well, thank you so much for being a part of the Money and Flow podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us. Normally we never have an interview that long, but maybe we're switching to long form. Anywho, super excited. 2019's coming. It's going to be pretty big. I hope you guys have a great day, evening, whatever point or wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for thinking about your finances and thinking about how you can flow into them. Take care.